Lovely. I'd like to take a couple of minutes to talk about why we're doing this and to introduce the Udyami Sathi Challenge. The Udyami Sathi Challenge is a unique storytelling challenge where the idea is to promote and bring out stories of micro entrepreneurs who we believe are unsung heroes, and we're not speaking enough about them. And most of the information that we have about our udyamis, or what we are calling our everyday entrepreneurs, is limited to reports and is limited to data. And the aim of this challenge is to bring out the human behind those numbers and behind that data. This is the third masterclass in a series of masterclasses that we are doing, and I'm so thrilled to have you with us here, Debojit. I'd like to quickly introduce Debojit, and before I hand it over to him, super excited for this session personally. So Debojit is an editorial associate with India Development Review, IDR, and he is responsible for writing, editing, sourcing, and publishing content.
I'm really sorry. It got disconnected. Yeah.
I was just introducing you, but so yes, very happy to have you here, Debojit. And I was just saying that you are associated with IDR as an editorial associate, and are responsible for the writing, the editing, the sourcing, and publishing of brilliant stories. You must read the ground up stories that Debojit works on and brings to us. And before IDEA, Debojit has been associated in editorial capacities with Sahapedia, Quint, and Sunday Guardian. And his treasure trove of articles and writings is also in the Himal South Asian, in Scroll, and The Wire. We will be sharing links of IDEA, which you must check out, and for stories of development in India, and also to the link of the Udyami Sathi Challenge in the chat box. And yes, welcome on a Sunday evening. Thank you for being with us here. And Debojit, over to you.
So I'll again add to the introduction a little bit. I come from Guwahati, Assam, and I moved to Delhi in 2010. So I came here to study journalism, etc. And then I you said, I started working with various publications. And apart from this, I also write short stories. So I think that has also been one of the, it has helped develop other writings too, in some ways for me. And so the purpose of this workshop, for me, is also to be like. Sorry.
Himanshu, we're facing some disturbance. Can you just go on, Debojit? Sorry about that.
Yeah. No, the purpose of me being here is also basically, apart from speaking about how to identify stories, also I want to speak about a little bit about the basics of storytelling, what to look for, what sets one story apart from another, and these kind of things. So I would like to use, and this is something that I've done in the past as well, but this is common story, right? Across cultures, we've heard the story about this boy who cried wolf. Yes. So, and basically this boy cries wolf, wolf every day, and then villagers turn up to save him, but then there's no wolf, and the villagers go back, and this happens twice, I think, and the third time when it happens, boy cries and no one turns up, and there is actually a wolf there. So the version that I heard was with a tiger instead of the wolf, because I think in the eastern part of India, tiger is bigger, has a bigger scare value in some ways. So children can relate to it. And then in some cases, the wolf story I remember, I think the wolf comes and then the boy loses the sheep. In the story that I heard growing up, the tiger eats the boy. So yes. So I will use this story to illustrate some of the points that we talk about. So I'll keep going back to the stories, uh, but also other things. So, I mean, before I start, did you have any questions? Did you have any?
No, we can
Yeah.
begin. For the participants, we can share questions in the chat. Yeah, we can take it.
So, see, for this session at least, I have divided this into like five different blocks of that are important to know before you start working on a story. So, the first question, of course, is what is the story, right? I mean, a story can be anything. The answer to that question can be anything. For example, you want to write about a business that you have started or your journey as a businessman. You probably want to write about your journey as a farmer. The answer can be as simple as that. Or you want to write about another micro entrepreneur in your city, in your locality, and that is the story. I mean, if you know what the story is, what you want to write about, that is the first step towards working on it. The second part of it is, why are you telling this story? Now, so so the answer to this can be that you want to talk about the success of or failure of your business, for example. Now, but the thing is that there are 10,000 people talking about the successful businesses and failed businesses, etc., etc. But why, for example, should people be reading your story and not the 10,000 other stories that are out there? Now, what is the motivation, for example, behind you telling this story? Now, the thing is that, for example, with the tiger story, the moral lesson is pretty much laid out there, right? Like you should not be lying. If you lie, then the tiger eats you. So, yeah. So once we are done with this, like figuring out this, the purpose of the story, we move on to the third part of it. Now, the third part of it can be interesting in the sense that, I mean, I feel that that is where you start like setting your story apart from, yeah, setting your story apart from the uh, very many other stories that exist in the same space, for example. Now, one story can be told from multiple angles, right? Now, the story of the tiger, for example, can be told from sorry, the story of the tiger and the boy can be told from the perspective of the tiger too. And if we do that, then what does it become? So, like, the tiger is entirely absent from the story in some ways. And when we are talking about the tiger, we are mostly speculating. Okay, tiger आया था, and I'm going to do this in a mix of Hindi and English so that it's easier, I guess, in some ways. Uh, but so the thing is that uh, tiger आया था और finally tiger आया और tiger ने like killed the boy. But and the other 2 days the tiger did not turn up. Now, if we are telling the story from the perspective of the tiger, it can also be that the tiger did turn up on all the 3 days, right? We do not know. It can be that the tiger was not actually scary. It was a friend of the boys, for example. So these are also experiments that people have done in the past. Like if you read, there's a very interesting poem by this Kashmiri poet Agha Shahid Ali. He has written this story of Little Red Riding Hood from the perspective of its poem, sorry, from the perspective of the wolf, and how the wolf is actually the victim in the story, and these whatever these are all false allegations on the wolf, etc. Similarly, this story also of the tiger can be told from a very different in a very different way. Now, for example, you want to write about an agri business in you want to talk about an agricultural business from the perspective of a farmer. अब जैसे कि we saw during the pandemic, right? During the pandemic, there were very many stories about the challenges that farmers are facing. Now, एक तो था कि अच्छा there is no market, access to market नहीं है, लॉकडाउन की वजह से people do not have access to cash. Then there's very many issues, and there were these were everywhere in all like publications that were covering agriculture this time period. Now there were then other stories that were quite interesting in the way that people were coming up with these interventions, right? Uh, People were, for example, some regions, Assam, mein, it was happening. It was happening in Andhra Pradesh. They come up with a barter economy. Now, the because cash nahi tha, so people had started bartering goods because they need goods and they have goods in the house. They had produced कि अच्छा चावल की खेती हो गई थी, इसकी खेती हो गई थी, सामान पड़ा हुआ है, बट बाहर मार्केट नहीं है हमारे पास. Then they came up with this hyper local markets, right? Those were some interesting perspectives. अब those are again now ये फार्मर की कहानी में ये चीजें भी जुड़ गई, लेकिन सेम अगर if I'm talking about the same farm, now is also the perspective of the farm worker, for example. They are also working in the same farm, right? But they, and if you are looking at the farmer as a marginalized person, the farm worker is even more marginalized. अभी हम बात एग्रीकल्चर के बारे में ही कर रहे हैं, and we are writing about a story about agriculture only in a particular area. But because we are telling the story from the perspective of this other entity, a farm worker doesn't even have land. A. B. We are talking about their say government schemes here. Farmer probably acha, they do not have awareness about it, how to access it, etc. etc. If we look at the farm worker, perhaps there are no such schemes or like special number that they are even eligible for as not being people who own farms. So similarly, वही farm के बारे में अगर हम बात करें कि there are these women farmers, right, who are working in the field throughout the day, but they do not have any say in the decision making. अब लेकिन they are also the people who are looking at कि खाना कहाँ से आएगा घर में, and if the people like if her family members are healthy, and all these things they have to make sure of, but they have no say in the decision making. अब उनकी स्थिति क्या थी कोविड के टाइम पे, that is going to give us a different perspective again, right? And similarly, I think if you are looking at now, if you add other wo into it, like the same जगह पे, if you are looking at the Dalit farmer, अब उनको क्या दिक्कतें आई थी वो अलग होगी कि probably they were not getting access to water to irrigate their fields because of casteism, etc. etc. So एक कहानी को एक ही जगह के कहानी को एक ही चीज को you can talk about it from various angles, right? I mean, this is like that, right? Like a huge, you have a painting, and then you have the main subject of the painting, but then there are corners may you will see these common people here, there, or something happening somewhere. So interesting stories often come from being able to see those things. Um, we then that is whatever the third part of it. We will get to the other parts too about like what else can set a story apart from another, and what also helps people pitch stories to publication. um I hope there are no questions so far.
I had a question, Debojit,
Yeah,
and I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if you want to take it now or later, but
No, I can take it
um,
now.
so what pointers do we need to keep in mind when we're telling stories of communities
Mhm.
who've been marginalized? So you give the example of a Dalit farmer, and I'm not Dalit and I'm not a farmer. So when I tell a Dalit farmer story, how do I make sure that I'm doing justice to it and I'm not like it's their story, right? So
Sure. See, there are various ways of doing this. One is to, of course, I mean, first of all, you should talk to the farmer. whoever you're writing about. एक तो ये तरीका है कि I mean just because we have read articles about what is happening, we should not go by that. We should actually interact with the people and what people are facing in that space. That is one more. Uh, the other thing is that you have to always, I mean, I think this is, I do not know who, uh, but like when you're especially writing reports and articles, you should never like it is not about your experience of the place, right? Like there are some you will encounter articles where like people are writing about visiting a Dalit village, but then the entire article is about how they went there, drank water, had food, and whatever. So to be able to keep yourself in the background when you're writing about, and that applies to writing about very many people from Dalit communities, women, very many people. You should be able to keep yourself in the background when you're writing that story. You'll have to be able to keep जो वो बोलना चाहते हैं, bring that into the foreground. One of the things that we do, and I do not know, I mean, I hope this is relevant here. But idea में what we usually do, and especially in the, I mean, all throughout all sections actually, um, we once we have written the story, whoever we have spoken with, we take it to them and ask them, so this is what we have written, and this is your story, and this is where we have quoted you. So do you agree with what we are saying? And we might be writing an analysis, and we might be writing an entire story around it, and their quote only has been used. But then अगर analysis हमारा उनको सही नहीं लगे, तो we should not ideally be going ahead with it. I don't know if I've answered your question. So
Yeah, get it.
uh, when when we are trying to inculcate multiple themes into of our own lives, uh, or okay, I think focus is again very important, right? Like when you're writing, I again when you're writing about someone else, right? Mm, so I think important thing is to probably not like write about everything. If you have access to multiple aspects of someone's life, you could probably try to focus on what you know best or what you can explore in the space of one article rather than trying to cover everything perhaps. Did I answer your question? uh, Important points of good written storytelling. A well written story would be, again this would differ from one kind of like for example like in non-fiction and fiction mein, there are going to be like different markers of perhaps a good story. But one of the things I feel uh, एक तो what are some of the mistakes people making writing a report? I feel there is a need to go beyond, and some of it I'll cover when I'm talking about the other points also. Some there is a need to go beyond talking about like go beyond impact stories in some ways. Ki, acha, this someone has done and this is great, but what more than that you are bringing to the table, right? Like if you're writing about uh, micro entrepreneur or person running a micro entrepreneurial program in Nagaland, it is great that they're doing it in a region where various forms of support are not available. But then, is that itself a story, or is there more to it than that you can tell? So I think being able to go beyond the like narrative that is done to dust, so conversations, investigations into like कि और क्या अलग है और क्या अलग फैक्टर्स है उसमें, and some of it again I'll go back to the Nagaland example also later on. But like for example, if you are just talking about the conflict and uh, whatever like unemployment in the area, uske aage jaake what are the things that you can cover to be able to bring those aspects that are not as spoken about. I think that is a very important thing. ये होता है. The other thing in when I'm writing fiction, what I also do is to be able to introspect in some ways through my writing rather than like there is also a tendency, right? Like often we do see that people are when people are writing about things, they are writing about like "Acha, this person is doing terrible things and that person is doing terrible things and that person is doing terrible things. But then where do you see yourself situated in that narrative? That applies to fiction probably not as much to report writing, non-fiction writing. But non-fiction writing again I think will be if you're writing it about someone else, then to remember that this is not your story. You should be in the background of it. For example, right, I don't remember exactly, but someone did a story on this uh, tribal community in Andaman, and that entire story became about like their experience of that place. And I think that again, right, like if you are not able to write about the people and present the story of the people, you should at least try not to like overpower the narrative. We, we have moved past that kind of colonial writing, and at least we are trying to. जहाँ पे हम वो anthropological survey करते थे जहाँ Hmm, hmm, yeah, I don't know. You would not know your their life, of course, like your own. But then I think so again with, for example, with ground up stories, what we do is that I mean, obviously that probably won't apply everywhere, but यहाँ पे हम we write the story from with their byline only, and जो हमको बोला गया है, we try to stick to what we have been told rather than like analyzing. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat for a little bit. Uh, do you have like are there more questions or should I move on to the next thing?
We can move on, Debojit, right
Cool,
now.
cool, cool. Okay. Uh, so next thing is again when and where the story is taking place, right? Like this is again like going to, for example, it is relevant to fiction writing too, and it is relevant to non-fiction writing too. Now, if we are writing fiction, for example, agar someone is writing a historical fiction, uh, you cannot be writing about, for example, सिपाही mutiny and वहाँ पे कहानी में अचानक से there is McDonald's standing there, unless you are writing magic realism or you're writing science fiction of some sort. Otherwise, I mean, you cannot possibly be doing that. So, keeping so how does timeline change a story, and how what aspects of that can you bring into that what you the story that you're telling, for example? Now, agar hum if you're talking about say in 1987 someone was running a small business. Their experience of running the business from someone who started a similar business in say 1993 post liberalization, was it different or will it be different in some way or the other? Did liberalization affect the same kind of businesses that people were running? Now this in itself makes one story different from another, right? Like acha kya, yeah, was it were things better for the people who were running businesses before 1987? That would also be interesting because we talk about liberalization in a certain way that like okay, it opened up very many things. Ab koi bol raha hai ki no, that is not what happened, and my business was running better before. That is a different kind of a story. But 87 ki story is not going to be same to the 93 ki story, right? Like, and I'm talking about like only a 6 year difference here. Similarly, in the case of locations, for example, now the tiger and the boy story, right? If we change the location of the story from a village to a city, uh, then what happens? Like, do you think people are still going to turn up in a, especially in a place where like people are not living in that kind of a close knit society, right? And people have like have a different way of living. People probably have like different kinds of work. Like, अब एक बार बुलाया, दो बार बुलाया, तीन बार बुलाया, are people going to keep turning up? That is one thing. The other thing is that also that very thing, right? Like, acha, tiger came this one time, tiger came this second time, and the third time. Do you think people in living in the city are going to believe that the tiger, there is a tiger in the city, like, and which has come up like तीन बार ही आ गया यहाँ पे, अब सिटी में तीन बार ही टाइगर आया, तो it becomes like a story in a local newspaper perhaps. So this, right, like just change of location changes that particular story entirely in some ways. Now, for example, again, like if you are telling the story of a farmer in the Marathwada region of Maharashtra, which is drought prone, it is going to be different from the story that you're telling of a farmer in probably Assam, where which sees like frequent floods. Now, in what ways is that कि अच्छा similarity ये है कि अच्छा there are farmers, they are struggling with probably some of the similar things, that access to schemes, this that, but and also that the climatic events, right? Like, they are struggling with this whole climate change. They're not able to predict कब क्या हो रहा है. अब but to survive doing farming, they probably will have to come up with like a very different kind of climate resilient methods, right? Now, a farmer in what is it, Assam might grow crops that can survive when the की बहुत पानी में survive कर जाए. But farmer in Marathwada would be probably growing less water intensive crops. सिमिलरली, अब किस तरीके से बिजनेसेस को डाइवर्सिफाई करना है कि अच्छा ड्राउट आ गया तो व्हाट काइंड ऑफ बिजनेसेस should you be doing, so that you have that plan in mind कि you might not get the same kind of yield, you might not get the same kind of profit from just doing agriculture in these places. So this, the location ka aspect changes the story in some ways, right? And we are still telling the story of the farmer, but कहानी वो नहीं है, कहानी बदल गई है बहुत तरीकों से. So yeah, and accordingly challenges have changed. Now, there is a fifth point to it that I think is important, but so unless anyone has any questions, I'll just move on to that. So, for example, for the sake of the workshop, let's just assume that like these are the 5 things, right? Like, another important thing is that how will you tell a story? There are 10,000 ways of telling a story, right? Like, and this probably will cover some of the things that we spoke about good story and good storytelling. Just brings into question the go of idea and style and structure. Initially, lots of the writings, and because there was a dramatic tradition and there were certain rules of writing कि अब वो जो 3 act वाला वो बहुत time तक novelists also when they started writing they followed it कि beginning is where you establish the characters, ये जगह पे है, ये खाते हैं, ये पहनते हैं. The middle is where you talk about the conflict, for example, and that is where the drama happens, right? Like if it is thriller, that is probably where from slightly happy space. Suddenly there is a murder that happens. अब that is where the drama is. अभी ये big reveal है. End में जाके कि end is the climax where you reach the resolution in some ways. कि अच्छा, either you catch the murderer, you family whatever issues get resolved or some kind of a resolution there. जैसे अब in that tiger and the ghost story for example, वहां पे boy dies and then कि हमको we get to learn that अच्छा we should not be lying. There is a structure there too, right? Like we have that this is a boy who does this, that this is a village that they live in, this is their occupation, and eventually we reach this thing where like that's now over time, uh, literary authors have played around with this structure. अब ये beginning, middle, end वाला जो structure है, you move the end to the beginning, beginning to the middle, whatever. Now especially with digital storytelling, जहाँ पे the attention span is very low, and you can only also have like very limited number of words, right? Like over time, we've seen like many publications have like even like the जो long form magazines थे कम होते जा रहे हैं. We have like we mostly have like very short space. अब 300 400 500 वर्ड में अगर हमको कहानी बतानी है वहां पे we probably do not have the space to do with that entire structure कि अच्छा मिडिल में हम ड्रामा डालेंगे उसमें उसके बाद ये करेंगे उसके बाद वो करेंगे. So in that also that has also necessitated कि काफी वो पैटर्न थोड़ा सा ब्रेक हो. Now for example if you're writing about the farmer deaths in Maharashtra, right? Like or like anyway, like say 30 farmers died by suicide in some place. Now the thing is that कि एक तो अच्छा that is कि वो एंड में नहीं आ रहा कि अच्छा दिस इज द बिग रिवील कि अच्छा ये पता चला ये हुआ है. You can also put it up front कि ये हुआ है, and then your story can be कि किस वजह से हो रहा है. This is what they are lacking, this is what they are dealing with in this particular area. Again like in this particular village में क्या दिक्कत आ रही है लोगों को कि एक साथ इतना बड़ा कुछ हो गया. One reason for it, for this approach over this whole dramatic one is कि हमारा पर्पस यहाँ पे ये जो रिपोर्ट लिख रहे हैं हमारा पर्पस इज नॉट टू शॉक पीपल, राइट? वी आर प्रोवाइडिंग एन इनसाइट. And the second reason also is that that is not the part that you want to sensationalize. So now again like you need not end the story by saying कि अच्छा ये इसका ये हुआ तो इसका ये resolution है, but you need not even provide a solution to what has but ये हुआ है और ये कारण है, ये कहानी यहाँ खत्म है. So like for example, right, like I mean, and also when you're writing, this is also an interesting experiment to do. Like I think when you're reading a story too, for example if you remove ये जो टाइगर वाली कहानी से if you remove the moral lesson from it, it opens it up to more speculations, right? Like for example हमने solution जैसे वो farmer वाले कहानी, we're not provided, we don't know what solution, or we haven't provided the solution. हमने बताया ये problems है, it is open ended. अब वहां पे भी इसमें भी दिस टाइगर स्टोरी में अब मॉरल लेसन हमने रिमूव कर दिया, इट इज ओपन एंडेड. अब 10,000 things might have happened there. No, none of the villagers have seen the tiger, right? The it could also be that the boy was lonely. That is why the boy was calling out the villagers every day and making up these things and doing these pranks. So, like if at the very beginning the boy is the story is such that but the boy has been killed by a tiger, and फिर उसके बाद the entire story can be an analysis of कि ये क्यों हुआ, and what does it tell you about the village, what does it tell you about the society, why did no one ask the boy why he was doing it again and again rather than just taking it as a prank at face value. There's one more thing that I would like to talk about, but before that, uh, could I talk like could I get a short introduction of people from the Sakhi team who are there?
Sorry, what? Debojit?
People from the Sakhi team who are present.
Yeah.
Can I get a short introduction of the people? I want to do a very small exercise.
Himanshu, are you here? I'm just checking who all are with us.
Hi, Debojit. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What specifically are you looking to ask from me?
Yeah. So I want to do a very small exercise from with
Right.
you guys. Uh, so I just wanted to check, like, do you guys go to the same office? Are you guys
Do
working out of an office?
right now, I
We
and Ishwarya, both of us are working from our respective homes.
Specific
we
homes.
we're working remotely. Yeah.
Did you guys have an office for that?
We have in Delhi, yes.
Okay. So, like, could we do a very short exercise? Like, we could take like 10 minutes, and you could write down like the first thing that you uh, saw why on your way to the office every day when you were going to the office, without like telling each other what you are writing down.
It's do I have to write? Can I verbally tell it?
Okay, you can also verbally tell it, but then let's go like one by one. Can Aishwarya start?
Um, am I audible?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. What I remember from my work to office was interesting. Um, I remember a lot of trees. I remember seeing a lot of trees on both sides of the road while walking to office. I walk to office because it's close. Um, I also remember seeing those huge yellow barricades because South Delhi has those stupid barricades. Um, I also remember seeing school buses and people running to catch them. And in summers, I also see my Nariyal wale bhaiya uh, and telling him that aate waqt I'll have coconut water when I'm back. And I also remember seeing a mother dairy kiosk selling buttermilk and yeah, dahi.
So can Himanshu tell me things that Aishwarya, like apart from what Aishwarya has told us?
I think the one thing that I vividly remember is the Delhi metro, and how many times I've traveled in the metro, and interesting things that happen, people do during the metro when I'm traveling. So that's something I do remember very, very vividly. I also remember sometimes the lines outside the metro, the time it takes. So you have to stand in long lines because usually V hours, peak hours, right? So that's one thing I do want to add what Ishwara has already mentioned.
So, for example, like you guys were, I mean, going to the same office, and then also it's the same journey every day. But like here, you guys are talking about like two, I mean, not different experiences, but like different aspects of going to office. Similarly, like for example, a space can be seen by a space, a journey, etc. will be seen by like two different people in two different ways. Unless, like for example, at times what also happens is that कि जब हमें ऐसे बोलने बोला जाता है, what also happens is that we want to say the right thing, and at times we like if five people are saying something, we feel like if you have not seen the same thing, then you are missing out on something, and that probably is the thing that you should have also been seeing. I mean, it happens to all of us, or happens to me. But I feel there is still there is this unique way of seeing that every human being has, and that, I mean, at times get suppressed due to very many reasons, because we have to function in this society, we have to do our work, etc., etc., and many reasons. Now, to be able to write, I think it is also very necessary to be able to get in touch with that part of ourselves in some ways, where we have that unique worldview hidden, right? Like, and this is, I mean, this can be how you look at your city, the space outside your house, inside your house. I mean, this is something that very many, I don't know, like very many writers have also spoken about. Like, I think I was recently watching this thing by Salman Rushdie, where he was talking about how, like, the ability, you have to have the ability to even look at your house as a visitor, or like look at yourself from outside in some ways. So that of course involves introspection when you're looking at yourself from outside. But like, how would someone look at this house if they were not from this house? How would someone look at this city if they were not just from this city? Because some rows, uh, look at the same locality every day, we take it for granted. For example, I go out, I take a cab, I go to meet a particular friend in a particular row of the city. और अब बीच में क्या हो रहा है रास्ते में, often I don't even notice. I'm just like, whatever, I'm listening to music, I'm talking to someone on the phone while I'm reaching there. As a writer, I think, and especially if you want to write about the locality, write about the people around you, should be able to see that. When I was like, for example, when I was growing up in the 90s in Guwahati, and that was a turbulent time, right? Like, there would be like serial bomb blasts, etc., and people went out of the house. People did not know if they are going to return, and mobile phones nahi the, so people, it was more difficult to check, right? Like, you would have to call someone's office if someone is coming late and has not reached home, and that kind of situation. Now that lends a certain uh, voice to the city and the people of the city too, right? Like, that anxiety is going to be visible in the way they are, the, I don't know, like, the way they speak, the way they are attached to people, in their emotions, etc., etc. There is always this urgency and this whole insecurity that you are going to lose things that you have. Similarly, you will also see that, like, and at the same time, the city was also, it is not a metro, and it was even less busy a city back then. Like, अब संडेज को जैसे संडेज को दुकानें बंद रहती थी, restaurants used to be closed. दोपहर को no one was working, people wouldn't be napping. Now, to be able to bring those things when you're writing about that city and that particular time, I'm sure things are a little different, and then to be able to capture the essence of that also sets your story apart, and that I feel is relevant to writing a good story or a bad story, because in some ways you have to also go beyond these narratives, right? Like, जैसे बन जाता है work with, like, on cultural publications and people pitching stories, etc., etc. अब वहां पे भी एक narrative बन जाता है चीजों का कि अच्छा, you, when you're looking at, I don't know, like looking at Calcutta, it's a cultural city. You are looking at I don't know, Northeast, people are like, I don't know, you're writing about weaving, you're writing about people um, celebrating festivals by dancing, etc., etc. अब वो जो then that story that has been told 10,000 times, how do you go beyond that and look at other aspects of that particular space? That is where that new story emerges, right? Now, for example, now Bombay ka hi example. Now, you talk like Bombay floods. Every time it happens, people talk about the spirit of Mumbai. Anything else happens, people talk about the spirit of Mumbai and how Mumbai bounces back, blah blah, and that. How do you write about anything beyond that? That Nagaland example also that I use, right? Like, you talk about Nagaland, you talk about the conflicted region, unemployment, etc., etc., and अगर हमें किसी को, हम किसी भी चीज को कवर करना चाहते हैं उस जगह की, तो you're writing about a small business also, you're writing about that. Acha, there is this problem of unemployment, and in that space, someone is providing job to someone. अब this is not technically a new thing. बहुत टाइम से लोग बोले जा रहे हैं इस चीज को, तुम्हें पता है कि ये this is the context of the. So recently, for example, uh, I was talking to this person in Nagaland who is running a skill development program and for micro entrepreneurs, and he's working with the young people of the community and encouraging them to start their own businesses and then helping them with various skills that are required for running those businesses. I also spoke to someone who has started their own business. They started by selling fruits and this and that, and then it has reached. Now they are like doing distributorship, and then they want to move to something else, etc. अब this is a great story in itself की अच्छी बात है, but ये जो इम्पैक्ट स्टोरी है कि अच्छा ये बहुत अच्छा काम किया है इस इंसान ने यहाँ पे, how do we go beyond that? When I was talking to him, I realized then he was talking about how the one of the challenges that he is facing, right? And often you will also realize that when people talk to you about the challenges, more interesting things come out rather than when people are talking about success. Or so he was talking about the very many challenges that he faced, right? Like one of them was working on the mindset of the people, and एक वो था कि I was like कि so lots of the societies that are not like living in this kind of I don't know, like it's different, right? When you talk about Delhi or Bombay, and when you think about Kohima, it would be you would think that it's a more close knit society. So uske फायदे होंगे if someone is trying to mobilize people, right? So when I asked him ki what were there any advantages to that, so he said that there were advantages, but there were also disadvantages, right? That कि जब mindset बन जाता है, the mindset was that people preferred government jobs there. People thought, and that is true for very many other places too, right? Like कि government job है तो stability है, and there is no point in doing these businesses, small businesses. फायदा नहीं होगा. You will waste your time. Rather prepare for a government entrance exam. So get into civil service or something like that. So he was talking about how he had to work on this mentality, and it's very difficult in a very close knit society जहाँ पे people like the elders, whoever believe a certain thing. How do you go against it? You cannot go and like go out on the street and like catch people and tell them कि अच्छा नहीं ये करो. There are advantages to this. There was this other aspect. He started engaging with church youth groups there, which is quite interesting, right? When you think about a religious institution, you do not think there are these possibilities in that. So, and the church, interestingly, obviously, like, I mean, a religious institution also has a different kind of relevance. And in Nagaland, people, like, lots of these people also very regularly visit these churches. And church plays a huge role in the life of people. So, Sundays ko jate hain. Parents also go, young people also go. And when we started having these conversations with the church youth groups, they were happy to give them that platform to come and like do a seminar, do a talk about the advantages of this. And this is technically a model similar to what like brands also do, right? Like तुम्हारे publication में you have this much of readership, this much of viewership. We will advertise your our product on your thing. Only that the exchange here was not monetary, but he was able to mobilize an institution that has that is a bigger authority than the community elders in this social setup. So that was the story that was setting his initiative apart from the 10,000 other initiatives that you can talk about. All of them are stories and all of them are like people doing good things. But from a readership point of view, from the point of view of pitching a story to a publication, this is also what sets his initiative apart. कि अच्छा ऐसा किया है किसी ने, कि can we also do something like this or whatever, or generally, right, it provides you an insight into the society in Nagaland. So yeah, so I think I've covered what I wanted to cover. If you have questions, I'm sure you do, you can ask.
You can unmute yourselves and ask the questions, or you can also drop it in the chat. And
Either way, anything works for me.
yeah. While others frame their question, I had one question, Debojit. So, um, even within this challenge, right, we're looking at multiple themes that can be covered as stories. And honestly, like for me, all of them seem interesting. So, whether it's the life, whether it's the business of the micro entrepreneur, whether it's the success, whether it's the failures that they have encountered, whether it's also their aspirations or the hopes that they have. How does one go about prioritizing, or are there certain themes that are just generally more interesting when it comes to writing? Or yeah, so like, yeah, what do you think of that?
I think some of it, of course, like is going to also be personal preference, perhaps. Personally, I like to talk about challenges more. Like I said, like lots of these other issues also come up when you are talking about challenge, and then you're trying to situate it in a particular region, location, identity, etc., etc. I think that is where like things that have not been covered come. When you're pitching a story to a publication, it also becomes very important. Ki what new are you telling me? And that new can, of course, be very subjective thing. But I think having some of these pointers in mind definitely helps, like with setting your story apart in that sense. If even if we are talking about aspiration, right? Like now, if you're talking about aspiration in a very generic way, then we can say ki acha, the aspiration of the middle class is changing, or like the middle class now aspires for different things. So like if we are talking about middle class aspirations, how do you frame a story? But then the middle class aspiration also would probably differ from place to place. It won't be the same in every region and location. Similarly, agar humko if we are talking about again aspirations, right? Like I think again, like recently we did a story where we were talking about uh, aspirations of the young people, and this was low income groups in tier 2, tier 3 cities. And the perspective, I mean, I would go with ki acha people, how are like these people who are getting into uh, for example, they wanted to get into sales in this malls and all. They wanted to work, and that they were looking at it and these are young people, right? And how the one thing that comes up often is that okay, are the parents or the whatever are happy with this kids studying and getting into malls? But that is not that. It came out that that was not the worry that they had, and their parents were not against. It's also that also depends on the social location. I think the upper middle class and middle class people will have a very different view of this thing than like say a lower income group, person coming from a low income group. Then yeah, and their priority again into a tier 2, tier 2, 3 cities was to stay closer to their homes. So if they found employment closer to their homes, they were willing to do it rather than ki you relocate me to Bombay. That was not something that they were looking at, and that is what we found out through that particular conversation. So that again, right, that is an insight that you are able to get out there, which again is not slightly missing from the mainstream narrative. एक चीज also helps कि what I mean, especially when I am doing stories, I also look up, fine, I want to cover, say, I want to talk about the e-shram registration, what problems are coming, like, and what are the problems that the workers are dealing with. Now, this is an issue that has been widely covered by publications. You check what people are talking about and read the articles that are available, and then you see what is the gap that people are not covering. Of course, talk to all the stakeholders. That is also something that how you're going to learn things. Talk to people who work in various spaces as workers. Like you talk to like domestic workers who want to register. You talk to construction workers who want to register. ये दिक्कतें क्या आ रही है? There might be something, and lots of these things also come through conversations. वहाँ से you will find a thread, and then you can go and have more conversations with people and figure out. But like it's very it's great to actually do some of the research and see कि हम वही कहानी तो नहीं बता रहे कि सबको पता है. तो from the selling your story point of view also, I think that makes a difference. Have I answered your question?
Yes, yes, thank you.
I have a question, Debojit. I wanted to ask you about the different kinds of structures when framing a story. Like you mentioned, like you could have a suspense and a conflict and end with an analysis of the society. So something of that, like a cheat sheet, like for people who are starting to write, what are the different frames for constructing a story?
See, I do personally, I like to have the beginning and the end clear in my head. That helps me, like, to know ki how this story is going to end. Like, and a very rough structure. जो भी, I mean, longer stories, shorter stories. The longer stories में थोड़ा सा शायद the approach is going to be a little different. But like, I have a rough idea of okay, this is how I'm starting the story and this is how it is ending. This is what I want to tell in the story. वो तीन चीजें, when I have those things clear, I think I can frame a structure. The first line that you put on paper is again very important. You have to, and especially जब हम like when we are working with very like space constraint में, we have limited number of words. The first uh, line, especially in journalistic stories, I think you should consider it as very. It should be a hook that takes you कि अब मुझे जानना है. For example, like 30 people dying somewhere in a one village is a hook. Now you would want to read कि आगे जाके क्या हुआ. So some of that I think.
Thanks.
So first person or third person, actually first person stories, personally I think on those times what I've seen is that first person stories are in some ways more effective than, and I mean I'm sure it differs from reader to reader and publication to publication, but like people like when people can relate to someone, right? Like even if you are ghostwriting for someone from a particular space or whatever, and like we have seen with personal essays, so many personal essays, people like कि जब I am telling my story, there is this element of okay, there is this कि, uh, like very many things, like people can assume like in personal essay, for example, they will think okay, this person is brave enough to put the story out there. But also when you're reading that story, you feel like okay, I can see myself here, or yeah, and not someone else telling my story. To that way, I think first person stories probably impactful in sense that readership wise, perhaps it makes a difference.
I have a follow-up question, Debojit. So personally, I like to write in first person. And so I'll take an example. So when I'm writing a, let's say 1,000 words long article, it could be essay as well, right? When applying to opportunities, where I struggle is when I'm trying to connect the paragraphs and making the transition from one idea to the next. So to connect them is where I personally struggle a lot. I am able to construct a paragraph that is very uh, which has one central idea and that holds together really well. Where I struggle is when I move to the next idea, or when I'm trying to connect one with the other. What can you suggest? What can I do to avoid that, or that will make it easier for me when I'm writing?
I mean, so what I do when I'm editing articles is usually that I look at it. I mean, of course, you also get the distance when you're writing an article. It's slightly different from when you're editing an article. But like I look at the वही मतलब if one part of it is flowing into another part of it, there has to be some kind. I mean, I don't think if I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly or if I'm like just repeating it. Uh, but that right, like there has to be a connecting line or a paragraph. दोनों चीजों में often. So what used to happen to me when I started writing, and there was this writing instructor, journalism, when I was doing my journalism. Every time he would circle these paragraphs and say, okay, this is a great paragraph, but what am I supposed to do with this? And that it took me a very long time to find actually answer to that, because the paragraphs themselves used to look great and I did not want to do away with them. But that also at times I think to be able to कि वो देखना कि if we are able to tell a coherent story, and if not, and that second paragraph has an entirely different idea, we might have to be brutal enough to be able to discard it entirely and just focus on continuing pulling that thing. Sorry, did I answer your question? If you have a follow up, you can ask.
Lovely. I think we already a little over time. um, and I'm sure that there are a lot more questions, and once we put it up, people will have more questions, and we can actually collate and send them to you and figure a way
Definitely,
of,
definitely,
yeah,
definitely.
figure a
Yeah,
way
yeah,
of that.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm also sure I'll have more time to actually think and respond to the questions.
yeah,
So that
yeah,
will be great.
yeah, yeah, yeah. um Thank you, Debojit. I think the written word is so powerful, and to be able to be mindful, and I just feel like the entire process of like an idea coming on paper, uh, it's brilliant, right? Like to see it happen at the end of the day when an article is ready. The thrill is unlike other. I'm very biased towards written stories as a person. I'm very excited for all the stories that we are receiving as a part of the challenge. Looking forward to share them with you. Um, but thank you so much for being here with us and
Thank
talking
you.
to
Thanks
us
for giving me the
about,
platform.
yeah, and for making like sharing also a little bit of science, I feel, behind the art of storytelling and written words. And I think in the description of the session we've also written that words can weave magic. And yeah, thank you for helping us take the first step to that. I think writing is a very long journey, but I think this is a great start. The session has been a great start for uh, all aspiring writers um, out there. Um, Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And yeah, we will be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone